Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Janet Carr. I am the Senior Vice President of Digital Transformation for Link3D, and we're so excited to have you here participating in another virtual additive manufacturing women in 3D printing series today called The Future of Polymers in AM, developed and moderated by AM Cubed. Kristen Mullerin.
Hi there. Welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. This is, I believe, the fifth in this series of virtual panels that we've put on since the pandemic started, but it is the last one that we will be hosting prior to, well, certainly by the end of the year, but also prior to our big type conference that's coming up in January. Today, this is the panel that we'll be hosting. It's the Future of Polymers in AM. In a minute, we'll get to introducing everybody. But before we get started, I wanted to introduce the type conference. So as I said, this is the last virtual panel that we'll be hosting before the type conference in January. So the type conference is January 27th, 28th. It's virtual. It's all day, 2-day event. And it's a really interesting conference. It's put on by women in 3D printing, but obviously, as with these events, everybody's welcome. It's really a different kind of event. We've tried to go into more of a human-centered area of the industry. So we will, of course, we'll be covering technology and industry, but we're also going to be covering people and economics. And we'll also be adding in a youth track. We're just now finalizing the agenda, and it's super exciting. We have over 125 speakers from all over the globe covering these different tracks. You can see here, this is just an example. These are obviously some of the more senior level speakers that we have from across the industry, but this is just a small section of who will be speaking. As I mentioned, it's global. Women in 3D printing has over 15,000 men and women, so we expect a pretty big turnout for this. And then as well, we will be using this platform, so there will be quite a bit of networking. We actually, instead of having just this one building that we're in right now, we will have 6 buildings. And so there'll be one building dedicated to each track, and then also a building dedicated just exclusively to networking. So block off both those days because it'll be a good event. And speaking of which, we have our platinum sponsors. So all the platinum sponsorships are gone, but if you're still interested in potentially sponsoring, we do have gold and silver left. So just reach out to me directly after this, either by email or LinkedIn or however you prefer to reach out. So just getting on with it, this is the panel that we're going to be having today. So I want to, has everyone been pulled up? So getting back to the topic at hand, we're talking about the future of polymers. I think some of you might have seen this morning that there was a big announcement made that Stratasys purchased Origin at a deal valued at over $100 million. So that's a really kind of obviously topical announcement that happened this morning, especially because Stephanie actually was the director of materials at Origin. And obviously Henkel is one of the primary foundational partners from a materials perspective. So I thought it was really interesting that that was announced this morning, and hopefully we'll get into it just a little bit. The other announcements that have been coming out recently as well that kind of correlate is Evonik has recently released a rubbery TPA material for multi-jet fusion that has really kind of transformed the capabilities of multi-jet fusion printing. So you can print actual rubber-like parts. It's pretty cool. I'm not sure if we'll get into that today or not either, but this is the kind of things that we want to kind of talk about. So as Janet mentioned, we have the Q&A function over on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them up there. If you like what question you see that you like, just upvote it, and I'll make sure to try to weave it into the conversation. We do have a lot to cover today, though, so we'll see how far we get. To get started, ladies, can you just give a brief introduction on who you are, where you come from, and what your experience is and insights into polymers as it pertains to 3D printing? Stephanie, do you want to go ahead and start?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to our discussion today. So Stephanie Benight, I am a principal scientist and president of Tactile Material Solutions, a company that I founded in 2019. We are a boutique consulting firm focused on polymers and advanced materials, which includes 3D printing materials. I should say that my background is more technical. I have a PhD in chemistry with a dual PhD in nanotechnology, and have spent much of my career doing research in materials characterization and also polymer development. I'm also excited about a recent report that Tactile Material Solutions has launched called the Tactile Report, that's exclusively focused on photopolymer-based technology and materials that are used in 3D printing. So I think that's going to be discussed also today in the panel. Right now, I'm currently located in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the process of moving to the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area. So very excited to be here today.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Aileen, do you want to go next? Aileen?
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks everyone. I'm Aileen Meneses. I'm based in Germany. I work for the company Henkel in the area of additive manufacturing. My background is in chemical engineering, actually. So for the past 12 years, I've been working in product development and innovation across different polymer technologies. I started my journey in product development for assembled products using nonwoven and PE films. And then after a couple of years, I decided to pursue an MBA here in Germany. And afterwards I joined Henkel, and first I started in the business development area for creating technologies that were enabled to increase or to enhance the process window for polymer materials in the area in processes like welding. And since almost 4 years, I've been working in different commercial roles in additive manufacturing, most especially in the area of photopolymers. So thank you for having me, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, and I think that leaves us with Sylvia then.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here. It's the first time for me to be in such a virtual conference, but I like it very much so far. Yeah, today I'm in charge of the market segment new 3D technologies at Evonik. So what does that mean? So Evonik is a company for specialty chemistry, a very large company. Yeah, new 3D technologies means additive manufacturing, more or less. I'm 31 years with Evonik. I'm 22 years with additive manufacturing. We supply polyamide 12 and other powders into this market. I was part of this, or I was driving it from the very beginning, so I know everything about powders. Maybe you are not aware of these powders, but it's polyamide 12 powder, which is used everywhere, but not under the brand Evonik. Yeah, so I think I have a lot of insight on the technical side as well as on the commercial side. So since 12 years now, I'm working completely on the commercial side, but with a full technical background. I'm an engineer by education. And I really started with the whole powder business also from the technical side. So I know what I'm talking about, and this is really exciting to have that seen growing and growing over so many years. And it's also exciting to see series production now come up. So that's yeah, really a great experience, and thank you for being here. And I'm looking forward to the discussions.
Great, thanks, Sylvia. Quick note, Sylvia, you're a bit quiet. If you could get it closer to your mic or something, it might be a bit, we can hear you, but it's just quiet. And I want to point out as well to everyone, it's kind of an interesting, we always have a really interesting global reach, I think, with these panels. And so, and again, that's the case here. We have both Aileen and Sylvia are in Germany, and oddly enough, both Stephanie and I are on the West Coast of the US. So we've covered quite a big set of time zones here. To get things started, I wanted to touch on something that Stephanie had mentioned in her introduction with regards to photopolymers. And the thing that became really interesting to me recently is I didn't realize that photopolymers made up over half of the polymers used for 3D printing. Obviously, Stratasys has capitalized on that with the purchase of Origin, we touched on earlier as well. From a perspective of, I think Henkel and Stephanie with Tactile Materials, I think you guys have both very specific insights into photopolymers. What do you see for photopolymers in the next 12 months as it pertains to 3D printing?
I'll lead off. I think, you know, we're going to continue to see more acquisitions and partnerships in the space. That's been a huge trend the last couple of years, is companies coming together, machine providers doing what they do best, and materials companies doing what they do best, and really having a good marriage for a complete solution for the customer. So I think we're going to see more of that. I also think we're going to see additional materials development. There's some really good materials that are out there, but there's still some of those injection molded materials, that those benchmarks that customers have from the current manufacturing methods, that have not been met. And so I know that there's continued innovation going on to try to meet those marks.
Yes, I agree. But actually, I think, especially in the area of photopolymers, you mentioned it's half of the market for materials, but I think photopolymers have been used for functional prototyping for a long time. So what I will expect to see is more photopolymers emerging for final parts production. And this is where I will expect in the next months to see more data on durability, basically. So consistency of end parts, dimensional accuracy over time in photopolymers. I think that we've seen some OEMs, we've mentioned one of them, emerging with very unique technologies that allows to have control reactions and more higher reliability when it comes to production. And I'm really looking forward to see more parts being produced with photopolymers beyond a prototype and actually for end use.
One question I have on the photopolymers that has come up a couple times in different conversations, and I'm not a photopolymer expert, but I'm guessing a lot of people out there aren't either. So, you know, I've heard that photopolymers, one of the big issues they have is the life expectancy of the parts, that it can be quite limited. What are your thoughts on that, and how is that true, and is there ways we can overcome that going forward?
Yes, so
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh, no, I think you touched on a really great point, and I was hoping that someone would raise the stability elephant in the room, so to speak, because it's a criticism that polymers across industries and applications get. And so I think it's, with respect to photopolymers, I'm super excited what Aileen mentioned about the durability data and showing that. I think some of the improvements in the material formulations and things like that, and also print technologies are helping to aid that. But the reality is that photopolymer-based materials are being used for production and real-world applications now. And so the showtime is here, and I think it's going to continue to expand.
I think I can only agree, sorry, Sylvia, because I think now the workflow validations that we have been able to conduct, and many material companies have been able to conduct with printer manufacturers, have enabled us to really say, okay, the parts have been fully cured. The parts are now showing the robustness that you need for end parts production. And I think this year was fundamental to prove this millions of parts being produced for production, and now we will just expect to see more and more coming in, where you see durability data being shown and applications beyond functional prototyping, but actually going into industrial spaces, going into aerospace, automotive, and rail, and also even, well, we saw this year in medical. So it's very exciting.
I think the classical photopolymer, like it was, I mean, I'm in the market for 22 years now. That's very difficult to reach the long-term stability. But there are so many developments. Maybe that's what you are talking about as well, to overcome this. But that really means development, and it means a different approach. Like for carbon, where you have this additional cross-linking. We are working at Evonik also for photopolymers or on photopolymer solutions. We are working together on this hot lithography approach. So you need something different than before. So, and that is exciting that now these things are really starting and going on, and that something changes.
So I think you've all really touched on the applications and the actual end use applications coming out into the market right now. So in the next year or so, next year or two, I mean, what do you see those big applications being for these materials?
I think this year especially, we saw, especially with the COVID situation, we saw the needs of having class 1 medical devices in a very short term window under exceptional and FDA approval. And I think once we were able to prove that you can actually get functional parts end-use parts and class 1 medical devices being manufactured from an additive process. I will really be looking forward to see more applications going into the medical space, for example, going into areas where we have class 1, class 2 medical devices being produced out of different technologies. I know that many of us have seen examples from the metal area, but I'm actually very much looking forward to see where we go there. I think we've seen now more recently some additional approvals on polymers for aerospace, so that's also very exciting for end-use parts. I don't know if in the next 12 months we'll see another product be validated there, but I think I will expect many more material companies coming in and bringing more diversity and a broader range of products and options for this type of industries.
I would say as the photopolymer, this is not a classical polyamide or something, it's a new material, and the applications depend on the property set that such a new and unique polymer will provide.
So maybe switching directions a little bit, we have one of the questions that's come up from Magda, thermoplastics versus thermosets. Which has the greater growth potential and where is the market headed? Sylvia, do you have any insights on that one?
Good question.
That's like the polymer question. I think it's difficult to just break it down into those two like very broad categories, because there's so many different aspects of the growth, right? There's customer influence, and then there's the machine as well that's printing the material. There's the print speed, there's resolution, and different technologies really excel at some of those categories. And so personally, I'm excited about photopolymers and DLP type methods because of the speed of printing you're able to get. You're doing these reactions in the matter of split seconds. Whereas if you have a traditional, more widely utilized currently technology like FFF, you have filaments that are fed through, and that it's a much slower process, and the resolution can sometimes be questionable depending on what you're printing. So it really just depends on so many factors. For me personally, I'm excited about the thermoset type chemistry, because you're doing that chemical reaction in the printer itself, and so it becomes this reaction vessel that you're making materials in. But great question. It's just difficult to answer in one or two sentences.
Yeah, maybe on the other hand, we have also advantages as a thermoplastic materials that are well-known materials. We know what we can expect, and all the standardization and approvals, that's easier to get, and also the quality control of the part afterwards is much easier. So there are disadvantages and advantages everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely touched on with the DLP systems. I mean, the other, Sylvia and Helene, what do you think? What printing technologies are you most excited about and think have probably the biggest potential for future real world applications? Is it whether it's next year or 5 to 10 years from now?
Well, my background is in photopolymers, so of course I'm excited about photopolymers, but mostly, as we said, going into the area of end-use applications. I think that now the new processes coming in are enabling us to achieve mechanical properties and thermal properties that we did not have in the past in photopolymers. So that's for me very exciting. I think photopolymers give higher flexibility in terms of the range of properties that we're able to achieve. We can go into the area of different elastomer materials and going through different durometers, for example, and try to design parts for those areas. or we can go into rigid materials and then think about properties such as in the area of toughness or functional or process temperature, and even thinking about additional functionalities, right? We received some requests on special properties in conductivity or FST properties. And I think this is, for me, very exciting. I think photopolymers allowed us to, and especially the technologies we've seen now, allowed us to see parts coming with high resolution, with very fine features, which is the key value proposition for additive. So that's, for me, a very exciting area when it comes to thermosets in general. When it comes to thermoplastics, I think that still the area of development is huge, right? If we think about all the thousands of polymers that are out there and that serving thousands of applications, we still have let's say, a whole journey ahead of us to develop materials across different technology segments. So there is no one solution fits all. I think the market's still small, and we can all work across different technologies to really develop more applications and really increase the adoption of additive.
So what are the things holding the adoption of these polymers back?
I do think it's reputation. You know, people are hesitant to think that polymers actually do meet the stability that you need for different applications. It's something that is pervasive in a variety of different applications and industrial spaces. So I think showing, you know, like Aileen said, showing the durability, you know, doing real world and accelerated aging tests to show service lifetime, really understanding that those materials are going to, and showing to customers that they are going to survive in those real world applications is key. It also, you know, a campaign around polymer materials, you know, really touting the benefits. You know, it's cheaper. There's, you know, a lot of times they're easily processable compared to metals, for instance. And so I think there's a lot of benefits, and really getting the word out, and then as well as showing that they meet different standards, ASTM, ISO standards, developing standards around the additive manufacturing methods, and specifically in the AM 3D printing space is important.
If I may add the perspective for the thermoplastic materials, for the powders especially, I mean, for long years, the machines only can be heated up to around 200 degrees C. And that, of course, limits the materials that are available for such machines. So we definitely need new machines if we want to process other materials. And I also can interpret your question in the direction what prevents us from using such materials in serious applications. And that's, again, a different story, because we have what happens in the machine, but we have lots of processes before that and after that. And coming from prototyping, we just had a look into this machine and we're happy if nice parts came out of that. But for a production process, much more work has to be done. And that is still ongoing here and there, and for each application. And that prevents us. So the machine is there, the material is there, but that's not enough. So we need really to set up a complete process, and that's what makes it so time consuming, and but it's coming. People are working on that.
I think you both kind of touched on something there that I'm curious on your perspectives is, you know, what kind of ASTM or ISO standards do you think are necessary really to move this into production end use parts?
I think standards that apply to additively produced materials. You know, a lot of the standardization currently is, I think it's around, at least in ASTM, maybe ISO as well, 80% metals. And a lot of that is driven by industry, you know, aerospace, those that are adopting those materials. So I think, you know, there's some really old and great plastics standards, you know, ASTM D638 for tensile testing and things like that. But really having standards that include additively manufactured, produced parts, and that are written with that in mind for plastics. And I think that's important. And having industry input to create those standards is really going to help drive production applications forward.
I would like to add something. You mentioned standards like, for example, for tensile testing or so. I don't think that they have to be reinvented. But there are other standards that are connected with them, related to certain materials.
Absolutely.
How you process them. And these standards have to be amended or have to be renewed or whatever. But the standard for testing as such, really, we should not really touch it. That's my point of view, because it would be not a good progress if you would have different standards for tensile testing for additive manufacturing and for tensile testing. Companies and users, they want to compare data. And if we do it different, they cannot compare anything. That would not be helpful. So if we want to have competition against injection molding, we have to follow the same rules and the same systematic approach. So we really should just amend where necessary, but keep what's already.
It's a great point. And just to add to that, I mean, you know, there are definitely some standards that, doesn't make any sense to change. But, you know, when you have customers asking about heat deflection temperature, I mean, that has nothing to do with additive manufacturing. That's an injection molded standard and spec, right? And so I completely agree, you know, that given that these are the standards that we have and what customers are familiar with, that's the entry level for getting them to understand and build confidence in additively manufactured produced materials. But sort of a step beyond that is, what are the other standards around the machine, around the properties, around the consistency, and things, you know, shrinkage, things like that we can have to govern those processes and ensure that 3D printed products survive their intended lifetime, don't have premature failures in the field, and you know, product liability issues later on.
Interesting. So before we get to, I don't want everyone out there to think I'm ignoring your Q&A questions. We will get to those in a second. And before we get to that, though, I wanted to just do something a bit more specific to Aileen and Sylvia. What are companies like Evonik and Henkel focusing on in their development of materials? Can you give any specific examples of what we can expect in the next in the future?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Yes, I think for us in Henkel, what we've defined is that we have selected markets that we want to support in the journey towards additive manufacturing. So everything related to automotive, aerospace and rail, general industry and medical are for us definitely focus areas where we want to make sure we work on products that are linked to each specific market segment, products that have a validated workflow where we can ensure consistency in the parts being manufactured, working very closely with printer OEMs, validating the workflows, validating the steps, but also making sure that we comply with the quality and manufacturing standards that each of this industry requires to have in place in our operations. So sometimes we focus, I'll give an example in medical, on making sure that the workflow is validated to comply with the ISO 10993-5 or 5 biocompatibility testing on the medical device. And that's fantastic. And that's really important to achieve together with the printer OEMs and the customers. However, you also need then to have, before the material arrives to the customer, have the processes and the quality management systems in place to fulfill the needs of that specific vertical. So for us, I will say that our focus is not only to drive materials with end use properties for those segments, but I will say having the quality management and operations certifications in place to be able to fulfill these customers. And in terms of properties, as I mentioned, anything in the area of biocompatibility for medical, in the area of industry with functional toughness and temperature resistance, and I will say specialty properties for dedicated markets. I think aerospace and rail demands us to comply with FST standards, and that's what we're aiming at different thicknesses levels.
Okay, then I can proceed with a powder perspective and Evonik perspective, which is broader than only powders. I mean, if I think about this, where do we focus on? Where's the development going on? I see three main focus areas. The first one is to develop tailor-made materials for each certain process. So, for laser sintering, we already are in the market, but it's also to provide materials for HSS, for example. It's to provide suitable materials for Evolve, for this step technology, for example, for next factory. That's also what we published. We had a long year collaboration with Voxeljet for the HSS technology, because each single technology really requires slightly different material. There's not one material that fits all. That is one focus area, really. And I mean, by providing such powders, we make it possible that such technologies, grow and find their applications. The second area is really to develop new materials and to open new applications, like Aline already mentioned. So we do not only provide a polyamide 12 powder, we also provide a polyamide 613 powder, which is very similar to polyamide 6, and which is easy to process in the powder bed fusion machines that are on the market. It's also the TPA material, which Christine, which you mentioned in the beginning, which is available and which really opens new exciting applications. And we are working on more materials, of course, but we also need machines. It would not really be good if we would develop a material which is requested from the automotive industry with a melting point of 260 degrees, if only a very few machines are really able to process this material. But we are working on new materials, on broaden the portfolio really to grow the whole market. And the third focus area is to improve the quality of the material. I mean, maybe it's a little bit weird if I say that, because we, with the polyamide 12, already proved that we can produce large-scale volumes of material in a really consistent quality over years. But nevertheless, that's always something to be, which we should work on improving. So I would say that are the three main areas here. And of course, to do this, we need collaborations. I mean, Eileen, you already mentioned this as well. So to work together with OEMs, with service providers, and of course with the machine providers, with the companies who provide the technology where the material has to be adjusted to. That's important for us.
So Sylvia, I think you touched on this a couple of times in what you just said, and it's a really interesting point, is it's that collaboration between the machine OEMs and the materials providers. What are some of the things that OEMs need to focus on to enable more applications for polymer-based 3D printing? What do you need from them?
Yeah, of course. I would say I need a kind of information what the material and what the parts should be able to fulfill later on. And that's not so easy. It's not, and sometimes, like for example with the polyamide 613, I have to go back to them and ask, hey, does it really have to be a polyamide 6? Or can I offer a polyamide 613, which is processable, which does not have any large water uptake and so on, which is much better and very well suited. And I also can prove that that it works on the commercially available laser sintering machines. Would you accept this? But of course, they have to overcome this, that in their approvals is only written maybe polyamide 6. Yeah. So they have to go deeper into detail. That's, I mean, it's work to do and time consuming, and that is one thing. And yeah, furthermore, I mean, if we go into series production, like I said before, you need to evaluate what happens before and after, so the complete production chain. I mean, for example, look at the post-processing of parts to make the surface smooth, to make color onto the surface. That all are processes that had not been available a few years ago. That's completely new, and that is what I mean with processes before and after. And as long as such solutions are not in place, it's really hard for these companies to go into serious production. Also, automation. The whole thing with a digital twin, so that you need consistent data throughout the whole process. That is what's missing and what makes it so difficult.
Stephanie or Eileen, you have anything to add on that?
I completely agree. I think we need to understand at the end of the day what are the desired end properties of the application we're targeting together with the OEM. And once we know what are the desired properties, we can select the right chemistry to fulfill those needs, and then work very closely with the printer OEMs to do a workflow validation and understand what is, in the case of photopolymerization, what is the right irradiance or what is the right layer thickness we need to have in place in order to achieve those properties. And as we iterate together through this journey, then we're able to really expand the breadth of different material options that we can offer to different industries. So I think workflow validation is fundamental as a close and very as a closed approach, and close collaboration between the printer OEMs and the material companies. And I think a second step that we haven't discussed here, it's actually the adoption of design for additive manufacturing philosophies in everything we do, right? So this is not necessarily from the printer OEMs, but jointly driving with the printer OEMs this type of culture across industries, where we're not trying to optimize a part that has been designed for CNC or injection molding, but we're actually thinking about what does this part need to do, and use design for additive rules to be able to produce those parts and find those mechanical properties. So I think those are the two key elements I see as fundamental for collaboration with printer OEMs.
Great. Well, I want to change tacks a bit here and move over to some of the questions that are being asked on some different materials. High performance polymers are becoming more available in additive, such as PEEK. What's the outlook for these types of materials in end use applications?
Can you repeat the question for me?
High performance polymers such as PEEK are becoming more and more available. What's the outlook for these types of materials in end use applications? Essentially, what are your thoughts on high performance polymers?
Okay, PEEK or PEAK materials. It's the top of the pyramid for plastic materials. So you use it if you need the special properties they offer. That might be, usually it's chemical resistance, it's a flame retardance, it's a good mechanical property. Of course, they are hard to process. They have melting points between 300 and 400 degrees. So this is for the machines in the market today really a challenge. And yeah, there is a need for this, but I think there's also still some work to do. So the solutions that are already available today, they still have to improve. Okay, you're not.
I mean, those are awesome materials, right? And we need to be able to reliably and quick, 3D print them in addition to just processing them with traditional methods. So They are even currently expensive. I mean, of course, lower pricing or being able to do that in production would be important, but you know, that's getting away from the 3D printing aspect of things. I think Sylvia hit the nail on the head that we need to be able to 3D print them just from the design adoption aspect that Aileen mentioned. You know, there's so much to open up doors there, and marrying the really high performance properties of something like PEEK with the design principles of additive, I mean, that can just open a variety of other application doors. So it's definitely so important.
So another question that came up is, where do you see the supply and demand for combining multiple materials with variable properties? I imagine, you know, I think you hear about this a lot, so I think the demand is there. What about the supply? Does that fall into any of your areas of expertise?
I mean, it's not only a material question, it's also a question about the process, which today can make use of two different materials if it's a hard-soft combination with different melting points each. So I don't see a real commercial solution for now in the market.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not something that material companies can influence directly. I think this is something where we will need to understand who can bring this type of technologies for us to start testing the different substrates and seeing how it behaves. I think there are some early examples of this type of topics where you may have the same substrates, but perhaps you orientate the certain fibers during the process. That is, I think, the closest I've seen in terms of combining different mechanical properties in one print job. But I will agree. I think I'm really looking forward to see multi-material printer at a level where we are in end parts production, or we can even decide where to strengthen certain parts as we print.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more of a design issue as well. I mean, from my experiences at HP, you know, the multi-jet fusion has pretty limited options in terms of the materials that you can print. But what you can do is you can design the parts so that they do have variable properties based on latticing and different things like that, so that you can have parts be squishier than other parts, for example, based on design, right, rather than trying to integrate multiple materials.
And you can do that to some extent with photopolymers and photopolymer technology as well. I think the multi-material thing is interesting, and it does come down to machine availability and features, what they can actually do. I mean, if you're talking about a DLP-based printer, you have one vat of resin. How do you have two vats within that machine that can pull and print resin to make a dual material part? I think it's being worked on, but there's still some development there with the ways to go.
I think other than, you know, I think with the what you just mentioned with the DLP systems or with powder-based systems, it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to blend materials specific unless you're doing it layer by layer. Right?
Yeah, blending, sure, but you can influence the curing of the material on a very fine voxel scale if you need to, and create a single part that actually is maybe soft on one end and hard on the other. That's what I'm referring to.
So it's the same material, but again, it's a process base rather than the material being changed.
Yeah, absolutely. The multi-material issue is quite challenging, and again, it's being worked on, but some ways to go as far as I understand.
I think probably FDM is really the only technology currently capable of literally combining different kinds of materials.
Yeah, but you mentioned something very important, Christine. You mentioned that we, by using the concept of lattice structures, we can independently of the stiffness of the single and one material we use, we can have parts with different areas of stiffness or with different stiffness from part to part by just adjusting the lattice structures with one and the same material. This is exciting. That's a possibility we have not had before. And I think that's still the potential of this option is not yet fully utilized.
Okay, so on some of the other questions, which commodity polymers have significantly moved into the engineering plastics and even become their substitutes?
I think it's difficult. I'm not sure if I understood the question, but I think it's difficult to say at this point that we have commodity plastics in 3D printing. Because I think up to now, 3D printing has been leveraging functional prototyping. There are a lot of polyamide materials that were used, some photopolymers that were acrylate-based photopolymers. So commoditization is something. It's a big word at the moment, but I think what we can say is that, of course, as we have or we expand the options for customers and we open more systems, then of course the materials are going to become more accessible to many more users and will drive more applications. But I haven't seen at this point in time, I don't see a market size that is steady and then we just have one product eating the other. I think it's just that we are expanding the overall market by bringing more solutions and bringing more applications in.
So I have to ask a question because we've had so many upvotes on it, but I'm not sure if the next question is in any of your areas of expertise. So feel free to say so if that's the case. Any uses of real bio-based, such as nanocellulose? I'm thinking that's probably a bit outside the scope of your specific areas of expertise.
I guess is it around like specific applications? I mean, people are printing with bio-inspired and bio-based materials, but I think if we're talking about that, and given the topic of the panel, the future of polymers and AM, I definitely think that that's exciting, if not only from a implantable medical device perspective, but also if you're thinking about recyclability, sustainability, things like that. And there are groups and companies working on that out there.
I think that.
So we have bio-based polymers in our portfolio, but not for additive manufacturing so far. But that's definitely something that we have to evaluate in the future. And in addition, we also have a bioresorbable material, that's our Resomer, that is used for a kind of implant which disappears over time so that you can save one operation after an accident, for example. That's a very exciting solution, and for this Resomer, we are offering already filaments as well as powders which could be used in laser sintering. But it's not mainstream. It's a special solution. But very exciting. So yes, we have some.
I think the bioresorbable, if that's the right phrase, is really intriguing in terms of looking towards the future in terms of implantables when we get into stem cell research and things like that. So that kind of leads us a little bit into the last topic I want to make sure we covered before we run out of time is sustainability. So sustainability is obviously a big topic. Sustainability is, I think, something that's going to be a really hot topic in general, but also in AM for 2021. Any trends you see in sustainability leading into the next few years that we should be aware of or be thinking about? Or things that your company specifically are working on?
Yeah, definitely. Evonik has big programs to work on sustainability, but for additive manufacturing, I mean, there are even more options, because if we look at the recycling behavior of powders, for example, that is something that should be improved very soon. To avoid all this waste. I'm aware of this. And also, like I said before, looking for me at the polyamides for powder that are bio-based. And I mean, we also have to look at the whole footprint, not only of the materials, but also of the whole chain compared to injection molding. that's much work to do, and it's not yet done.
Yeah, Sylvia touched on this, but when you say sustainability, I think recyclability is like the first sort of associated word that pops into my head. And when you think about recyclability of materials, you know, our compostability, I mean, plastics are somewhat compostable. Some of them just, you're talking about a wide variety of time frames for some of them. So when it comes to recyclability, it really needs to be like a focus of the company that's developing those materials. And Sylvia mentioned, you know, they have a sustainability initiative. I know DSM does as well. There's others that are doing that. And, you know, when you have that sort of driving force, it's a priority in the development. And there are companies out there that I think is really fascinating in the photopolymer space, that they're actually focused on developing resins from recyclable components. So starting off with recyclable materials and then building, you know, production or grade materials from that. And so tying into Sylvia's point about the full process and production cycle, you know, you have the final resin, but you also have the starting materials, and then you have the final product, and how that is sustainable and what the other components are that go into the product. And so it's a whole sort of lifestyle and not lifestyle, but life cycle that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we start with the raw materials, and as you said, having an overarching sustainability approach and strategy, where you start by making sure that you consider bio-based materials as part of your raw materials when you start your formulation, working in the process to work with customers to work on design for additive rules that allow us to produce parts that are lightweight, and hence reducing CO2 footprint of the parts that are being manufactured today. We talk about having print reliability, so you have less waste of produced parts, right? You don't have to get rid of so many parts at the same time. And once you use these parts, how can you increase the efficiency of the overall process? And even beyond that, what do you do with the packaging, where how you're shipping these products to the customer? And especially for us in the photopolymer space, we need to do proper disposal of packaging for reactive materials. So that's why, in collaboration with TerraCycle, especially in the US, we've launched this initiative where we are able to provide recycling boxes to our customers, so we can make sure that we control the disposal of these photopolymers containers. So it's, as you've said, it's every single touch point and how you drive innovation, manufacturing, and even customer experience through with a sustainability agenda.
Well, that's great. I think that's a good place to end, unless anyone, Stephanie or Sylvia, have any final thoughts on the topic?
I guess the only thing the only thing I'll say is, if you're at a company and you're considering working with polymer materials, or you're unsure, or you don't think they will fit for your application, just think again. There's so many promising polymer-based materials that are out there, and they're only getting better. And, you know, Aileen mentioned rail, aerospace. You know, these are traditionally, especially in aerospace, medical, highly regulated industries that are finding uses for polymers. And it's just really exciting to see that they're making it to the prime time in real world applications.
Great. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. Stick around. We are going to have additional networking. And if you have any questions, you can find any of these three people at a given table and ask them directly any questions here that we didn't get to. There were a lot today we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. I feel like we could have talked for quite a while. And check out the TYPE conference in January. Register for it now if you haven't already. As I said, we have over 125 speakers. A lot of them will be on panels just like this. There will be also individual speakers. Stephanie, I know, is one of them. So check it out as well. Type3dprinting.com. So see you guys in the networking.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.